The courtroom was electric with tension. Every eye was fixed on Malik Rivera, who sat silently at the defendant's table. A nervous murmur rippled through the gallery as the prosecutor, a sharpshooter man in his mid-40s, strode to the podium with the confidence of someone who had already won. Malik, however, sat as still as a statue, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't look nervous. He didn't even seem aware of the weight of the moment. The truth was, Malik had already decided that nothing anyone could say or do would change what he had already set in motion. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor," the prosecutor began, voice booming as it echoed through the cold, imposing room. "This young man, Malik Rivera, has infiltrated some of the most secure systems in the country. His actions weren't a mistake. This wasn't some hacking-for-fun activity. No, Mr. Rivera's actions were intentional. He sought to destroy systems that have protected this country for years. He is a danger, and he needs to be punished to the full extent of the law." Malik's eyes flickered, his gaze moving across the room, settling on the spectators. The press photographers, eager to capture every moment, were snapping away, but Malik didn't flinch. This was the moment the world had been waiting for, the one where a young man with nothing to lose stood on the precipice of unraveling a conspiracy that spanned decades. Yet, despite the public spectacle unfolding before him, Malik wasn't afraid. He had nothing to lose. This was just a final act in a story that had begun years ago, long before the courtroom, long before the world knew his name. It had begun with a teacher's scorn, a dismissal that would ignite something inside of him. Malik sat at the back of the class, his head down, his notebook open but filled with little more than doodles and scattered notes. The teacher, Mrs. Langdon, stood at the front, droning on about algebraic equations that seemed more like nonsense than anything practical. The other students were either asleep, chatting, or distracted by their phones. No one was paying attention, least of all Malik. "Mr. Rivera," Mrs. Langdon's voice broke through the murmur of the class like a whip crack. "I see you're busy with something far more important than learning, yet again." Malik didn't look up. He kept his focus on the scribbles in his notebook. His classmates snickered. They were used to Mrs. Langdon's attempts to single out students, and Malik, with his quiet demeanor and humble clothes, was an easy target. Another incomplete assignment. "You're throwing your future away, Malik. If you don't start taking this seriously, you'll be a nobody, just like everyone else from where you came." The word stung, though Malik wouldn't show it. He had heard similar sentiments his whole life. His classmates, his teachers, society, they all saw him as just another kid from a broken home, someone who was destined to be forgotten. To them, he was invisible. But Malik wasn't like the others. He didn't need to be the loudest or the most outspoken. He didn't need their approval. He had a skill that no one could see, a gift for understanding things others couldn't. Computers, networks, encryption, these were the things that made sense to him. While his peers were obsessed with partying or trying to fit in, Malik spent his nights exploring the dark corners of the internet, unraveling the complex systems that governed the world. He wasn't a nobody. He was something much more dangerous. It was that night, after Mrs. Langdon's verbal attack, that Malik's path was sealed. He sat in his room, the dim glow of his computer screen illuminating his face as he dug deep into a corporate network he had been studying for weeks. He had stumbled across a security flaw, a small, overlooked vulnerability in the system of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. The files he found were encrypted, but not beyond his reach. Malik had spent years teaching himself how to crack codes, how to manipulate systems. This wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a way to see the world, to understand its inner workings. He decoded the files. What he found inside took his breath away. There, buried deep in the company's records, were communications that tied the tech giant to a covert operation involving political corruption, financial fraud, and surveillance of entire populations. The files detailed how they manipulated governments, how they controlled the flow of information, how they blackmailed people into compliance. It was a conspiracy of epic proportions, one that stretched far beyond anything Malik had imagined. The world didn't know it yet, but Malik had uncovered the truth, an empire built on lies and manipulation. He could bring it all down, expose them, but he knew the risks. The people behind this conspiracy were powerful, untouchable. They would stop at nothing to protect their empire. But Malik didn't care. This was his chance to make them see him, to make them pay for what they had done. Malik's decision was swift. He encrypted the files, scattered them across various servers, and then, in one calculated move, leaked the data to the public. The information spread like wildfire, news outlets, social media, independent journalists, all picking up on the story. The truth about the corruption, the surveillance, the manipulation of entire systems was out. Malik's name was suddenly everywhere. Headlines screamed about the young hacker who had exposed a global conspiracy. He was no longer the quiet kid from the back of the class. He was now the most wanted person on the internet. The corporations, the politicians, the powerful figures, everyone was scrambling to cover their tracks. But as the media exploded with coverage, Malik felt no joy. He was a ghost in the system now. He had exposed the truth, but at what cost? His family was in danger, his life in ruins. The people behind the conspiracy had powerful allies, and they wouldn't stop until Malik was silenced. Weeks passed, and Malik's world became a game of cat and mouse. He stayed hidden, moving between safe houses, always one step ahead of those who hunted him. But then, one evening, as he sat in a dimly lit room, a message flashed on his screen. "We know what you've done. You've exposed the truth, but now it's time to face the consequences. Meet us tonight. Alone." It was a trap. Malik knew that much. But he didn't hesitate. He had nothing left to lose. That night, Malik arrived at the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. He entered cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. And then he saw them. A group of men, their faces obscured by shadows, stood waiting. The leader stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "Malik Rivera," he said, his voice cold and smooth. "You made quite a name for yourself, but this is where your story ends." Malik's pulse quickened, but he stood his ground. "You're not the first to threaten me, and you won't be the last." The leader raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Do you think you can expose us and walk away unscathed? You're just a kid who got lucky." Malik didn't flinch. "I'm not a kid. I'm the one who's going to bring you down." The tension in the air was palpable. Malik knew the game was over. But in that moment, he wasn't afraid. He had already won. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. These men might silence him, but they couldn't erase the evidence. The world would know who they were, and they would never stop looking for the people they had tried to bury. As the leader lunged toward Malik, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the silence. The men froze. Malik's heart raced, but he didn't move. The cavalry had arrived, but who were they? The last words of the leader hung in the air as Malik was pulled from the scene. "This isn't over." Malik had exposed the truth, but now he was the one in the spotlight. The story was far from over, and the real battle had just begun. Malik Rivera's heart pounded as a warehouse door creaked open, the echoes of his footsteps swallowed by the suffocating silence. His pulse raced, not from fear, but from the anticipation of the confrontation. The sirens had been close, too close for comfort, but they were gone now. The night was still, the shadows heavy, as if the world were holding its breath. He had always been the overlooked one, the quiet student with a broken past, the kid who blended into the background. No one had ever expected him to do something like this. Yet here he was. The men in the warehouse stood motionless, their dark figures flickering in the dim light of his phone. They'd been waiting for him, no doubt, tracking his every move. Malik didn't flinch. His hands, once trembling from the pressure of what he'd done, were steady now. He had already made his choice. There was no going back. "You've made a huge mistake, kid," the leader said, his voice low and smooth, laced with a quiet menace. The man's face was hidden in the shadows, but his cold eyes gleamed with certainty. Malik didn't answer. Instead, he glanced behind him, his mind calculating the next move. The sirens had been a distraction, but for whom? The cavalry had arrived, but who were they really? Were they his allies, or had the powers that be already moved to silence him? Either way, he had no time to second-guess himself. "You thought you could expose us," the leader continued, stepping closer, "that we wouldn't find you, that we wouldn't stop you. You really think you can change anything?" Malik's lips curled into a thin smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think I can change everything," he said, his voice calm, almost attached. But I know you're scared now. I know you're scared of what comes next." The leader stopped in his tracks, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Malik's words had struck a nerve. The man had underestimated him. They all had. "We're not scared of you," the leader finally snapped. "We're scared of the truth, and that's the one thing you can't control." A chill ran down Malik's spine. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something he couldn't explain. He was standing on the edge of a precipice. The truth had been his weapon, and now it had become his greatest enemy. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Malik turned, expecting someone else, but saw only darkness. The sirens were gone. The room felt smaller. The shadows were closing in. Before Malik could process the movement, the leader lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? You think you're the one who's going to bring us down? It's not that simple." For the first time, Malik felt a flicker of panic. He hadn't planned for this. The power dynamic had shifted. The warehouse, once an open space of confrontation, was now a cage. The walls were closing in, and Malik was caught in the trap. His heart raced, but he steadied his breath. He had to think. He had to stay focused. He looked the leader in the eye, defiant. "You're right," Malik said slowly, his words carrying a weight of realization. "It's not that simple, but that's why you're scared. Because now, everyone knows what you've done." The leader's face twisted with frustration. Malik knew he'd struck a nerve. The truth, the one thing they thought they could control, had slipped beyond their reach. In that moment, something shifted. The sound of a car engine revved outside the warehouse. It was unmistakable, a familiar roar. Malik had heard it before, but now it sounded like salvation. The cavalry was here. Just as the leader drew his hand back, the door to the warehouse exploded open. Flashlights flooded the room, and figures in tactical gear poured in. Malik's breath caught in his throat as the unexpected force overtook the men in the warehouse. The leader's grip loosened, and Malik stumbled back, eyes wide. For a split second, everything seemed surreal, too much happening at once. The men who had held him captive just moments ago were now being pinned to the ground by armed agents. "Malik Rivera," one of the agents said, stepping forward, his voice stern but not unkind. "We've been looking for you. You're safe now." Malik didn't move. The room was a blur of flashing lights, shouting, and chaos. But something felt off. He couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. Not after everything he had uncovered. One of the men still lying on the ground hissed, "You'll never know the whole truth, kid. They'll bury it. They always do." Malik's breath caught. The truth. His truth. Was this really the end? Or had he just walked into a trap set by someone else? Someone more powerful than he could imagine? The agent looked back at Malik. "We need to get you out of here." But Malik didn't move. His mind raced, piecing together what had just happened, what this all meant. The people who had been hunting him, they weren't the only ones pulling the strings. The very organization that had saved him was part of the same network. Malik had known this from the start. It had never been about justice. It had been about control. And now, the real game was just beginning. "Who sent you?" Malik's voice was steady, though his heart was hammering in his chest. The agent hesitated for a moment, and in that second, Malik knew. This wasn't over. It wasn't over by a long shot. The agent's voice was low, almost a whisper, as he stepped closer. "We can't say, but we know everything you've done, and it's only a matter of time before they come for you again." Malik's mind spun as the agent's words settled into him like cold water. He wasn't safe. Not really. The conspiracy was deeper than he had imagined, and the agents he thought were his allies were just part of the larger system. The war he had started wasn't finished. It had just changed direction. As the agent hand rested on his shoulder, Malik knew one thing for certain. The real fight was only beginning. Malik Rivera stood in the sterile, dimly lit office, his fingers tapping nervously on the cold metal of the desk. The walls were adorned with sleek, modern art, but they felt suffocating in their emptiness. The room hummed with the quiet buzz of the air-conditioning system, an unnerving contrast to the storm raging in Malik's chest. The agent who had pulled him out of the warehouse hours ago, Special Agent Hayes, was seated across from him, eyes cold, calculating. The brief flicker of compassion Malik had seen earlier was gone, replaced by the detached professionalism of someone who was used to handling dangerous people. "What do you want from me?" Malik's voice was steady, but inside, everything was unraveling. He had just been pulled out of a dangerous situation, but he wasn't safe. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Agent Hayes leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "I think you know the answer to that. You made quite a mess, Malik. You've brought down an empire, but now you're going to help us clean it up." The words hit Malik like a slap. He had known from the beginning that no one was truly on his side. He had known that the system he had exposed was far more pervasive, far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. But hearing it from Hayes, from someone who had seemingly come to his aid, made the truth hit harder. "I didn't do this for you," Malik said, his voice cold. "I did it to expose the truth, to bring down the people who think they're untouchable. If you're here to use me, you've got the wrong person." Agent Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't even react. His eyes were trained on Malik, but there was no malice in them, only a calculation. "You're too naive, Malik. This isn't about right or wrong. This is about power. You've seen what these people can do. The question is, what are you going to do now?" Malik wanted to scream. He wanted to lash out, to run, but something inside him told him to stay calm. He had been underestimated before. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. "You think you're any different?" Malik asked, narrowing his eyes. "You're just another part of the same system. You'll turn me in, just like the others. You'll use me and discard me when you're done." Hayes didn't flinch. "We'll see about that. But here's the deal. You become the most valuable asset in a game that's bigger than you. You're in the middle of something much larger than a simple hack. Your actions have stirred the hornet's nest, Malik, and now you're the only one who can put it back together." Malik's mind shifted back to the classroom, to the day that had set everything in motion. It was only a few months ago, but it felt like a lifetime. Mrs. Langdon had been standing at the front of the class, berating him as usual. His classmates had been snickering, their whispers like daggers. Malik had been used to being the butt of jokes, but that day it hit harder than it ever had before. "Why can't you be more like the other students?" Mrs. Langdon had asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're clearly smart, but you never try. You never do the work. You're going to throw your future away if you keep this up." At the time, he hadn't said anything. He had just sat there, staring at his desk, feeling the familiar sting of being overlooked, of being dismissed. But that day, something in him snapped. Malik Rivera wasn't going to be the person they all thought he was. He wasn't going to fade into the background and let the world dictate his life. He was going to take control, expose the things people didn't want to see, and make sure the world understood the power they tried to ignore. The memory brought a twisted sense of resolve. Mrs. Langdon's words had stung, but they had ignited something in him. The quiet student in the back row was gone. The world had forced Malik to stand up, to take action. And now, no matter what Agent Hayes said, no matter what anyone said, Malik was going to finish what he started. Agent Hayes shifted in his seat, pulling a file from the desk drawer and sliding it across the table. Malik eyed it warily, wondering how much of this was truly meant to help him and how much was a trap. But his curiosity won out, and he opened the file. Inside were more names, more files, more evidence. It was a list of people Malik had never seen before, but they were all tied together by one thing: power. Not just financial power or political power, but control over everything: data, information, decisions. These were the ones who had orchestrated the conspiracy Malik had uncovered, the ones who were above the law, above anyone's reach. But there was one name that stood out: Tessa Hollis. She was listed as a key player, someone far more powerful than any of the people Malik had already exposed. And she had connections everywhere: government, tech, finance. Malik's breath caught in his throat. Tessa Hollis was someone he'd heard of before, a name whispered in certain circles. A woman who had built an empire not on tech, but on data, the kind of data that controlled people's lives. The kind of data Malik had cracked open. But there was more. The file revealed that Tessa had been orchestrating the very network that Malik had stumbled upon. She was a mastermind, the puppet master pulling the strings. "You're a pawn in this game, Malik." Hayes' voice broke through the silence. The truth you expose is only a fraction of the larger picture. Tessa Hollis runs this game, and now she knows you're a threat. You've got a target on your back. Malik's mind raced. Tessa Hollis, the true villain, the one who had controlled the string from the shadows. And now she was after him. The door to the office suddenly swung open, and 2 agents stepped in, their faces grim. "We've got a problem," one of them said, his voice tight. "We've just intercepted a message. Tessa Hollis knows everything. She's coming for him." Malik's heart stopped. "Who is she?" he demanded, his voice cold with dread. Agent Hayes looked at him, his eyes filled with a silent warning. "She's the one who doesn't leave any survivors." Malik's blood ran cold. In that moment, he realized that what he had uncovered was only the beginning. Tessa Hollis was a real danger, and the game he had started playing was far from over. The question now wasn't whether he could survive, but whether he could outsmart her before she silenced him for good. Malik had never felt the weight of fear so viscerally, the air in his lungs suffocating, the tension crackling in every corner of the dimly lit room. The door had been shut behind him with finality. Agent Hayes, who had once seemed like an ally, now stood across the room, his eyes cold, calculating. The other agents, silent, ominous, flanked the walls, watching him like hawks. "Where are they?" Malik demanded, his voice tight with urgency. He had no time for games now. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "You'll get your answers, Malik," Hayes replied, his tone unnervingly calm. "But first, you need to understand the situation. You've made a mess of things that go far beyond what you've already exposed." The words hit Malik like a slap, but he kept his posture steady, his mind racing. What had he missed? In all the chaos, had he missed something critical? Hayes' gaze flicked briefly to one of the agents, a silent communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Malik, his expression now shadowed with something darker, more dangerous. "You thought exposing the conspiracy was the end? You're wrong. You're part of something much bigger. And now—" His voice trailed off, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Malik's mind. Was Hayes not in control? Was this just a game to them? Malik stepped forward, his pulse quickening. "What are you talking about? What is it that I'm really dealing with here?" Agent Hayes didn't respond immediately, letting the question hang in the air. The tension in the room was palpable, thick with unspoken truths. It felt like a standoff, not just between Malik and Hayes, but between Malik and everything that had been done to him. The system, the conspiracy, the manipulation. He was staring it all in the face. Then Hayes spoke, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Tessa Hollis. She's not just some figurehead. She's the one pulling the strings behind all of it. And you, Malik, are now her biggest threat." The name sent a chill down Malik's spine. Tessa Hollis. She had been the mastermind he'd uncovered, the architect of the conspiracy, the one who had been orchestrating the world from the shadows. But now, hearing her name spoken in such a way, he felt the enormity of the danger that he had walked straight into. "You still don't get it, do you?" Hayes continued, his voice colder than before. "The system you've exposed? It's just the surface. Tessa controls far more than you know. And she's not just after you because you hacked her files. She's after you because she needs to shut you down before you expose her fully." Malik's mind raced. Every word from Hayes was like a punch, knocking him back with the weight of the truth. What had he really uncovered? The small pieces he had thought were the puzzle had now expanded, grown larger than he could have ever imagined. Tessa Hollis was far more than just a tech mogul or politician. She was a global puppet master, pulling at the threads of governments, economies, and now Malik's life. "You're telling me," Malik said slowly, his voice edged with disbelief, "that I'm not just fighting a corrupt corporation or a few powerful individuals. I'm fighting an entire system that she controls." Agent Hayes' gaze hardened, his voice dropping even further. "Yes, and the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it becomes. You're not just exposing one conspiracy. You're about to set off a chain reaction that could bring everything crashing down. And trust me, Malik, that's not something they'll let happen. Not without a fight." Malik took a step back, his mind spiraling as the implications settled in. This wasn't just about exposing a few corrupt leaders. This wasn't just about hacking into the system for the sake of a few headlines. This was war. And in this war, he wasn't just a hacker. He was a target. Malik's mind shifted again, this time to that day in Mrs. Langdon's classroom. The words she had spat at him, words that had burned with judgment, echoed in his mind. She had seen him as nothing more than a failure. She had no idea what Malik was capable of. And maybe, just maybe, that was the thing that had pushed him to the brink. Mr. Rivera, she had sneered, looking down at him as if he were beneath her. Why can't you just do what's expected of you? You're smart, but you're wasting your potential. You'll never make it far unless you pull yourself together. At the time, Malik had taken the word as a personal insult, something he carried with him as a mark of shame. But now, standing in this high-stakes game, those words held a different meaning. They weren't a condemnation. They were a catalyst. He had proven her wrong in ways she could never have understood. The world had underestimated him. Yes, but now he was the one in control of the narrative. It was the power of being overlooked that had made him dangerous. And now, here he was, not just a student from a broken home, not just a kid who had been thrown away. He was a threat to everything that had been built by people like Tessa Hollis. Hayes' words snapped Malik back to the present. The agent's expression had shifted. There was something more in his eyes now, an understanding, a realization that Malik wasn't just another pawn in this game. He was something else. You think you're in control now, Hayes said, his voice strained with urgency. But it's not that simple. You've got their attention, and they'll come for you. They'll come for everyone who helped you. Malik's chest tightened. Who else is involved? That's the part you don't want to know, Hayes replied. His voice had lost its earlier coldness, replaced by something darker, more knowing. But you need to get out of here. Now. It's not safe. Malik's instinct screamed at him to run, but there was one thing that still burned at the back of his mind. And you? What's your part in all this? Agent Hayes hesitated, his lips pressed tight. He wasn't ready to answer, but Malik could see the struggle in his eyes. There was something more to the agent, something he was hiding, something dangerous. Before Hayes could speak, the door slammed open. A new figure entered the room, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the floor. Agent Hayes, the man said, his voice low and authoritative. I think it's time we end this little charade. Malik's stomach twisted. His instincts flared. Who was this new player? Hayes turned to face him, his face suddenly pale. You don't know what you're doing, Hayes warned. You're making a mistake. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a kind of smile that meant everything had changed. Malik felt the ground slip out from under him. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if the truth he had uncovered would be enough to save him, or if it would be the very thing that destroyed him. The man took a step closer. Tessa Hollis is not the biggest threat you face. We are. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one getting louder as Malik's heart raced faster. He had seen this before, the heavy-handed pursuit, the feeling of being hunted, and yet now it felt different. The walls in the room seemed to press in on him, each breath he took now thick with the weight of the moment. The man who had entered the room earlier, who had introduced himself as Director Kane, was no ally. Malik had known that the moment he stepped inside. Hayes had warned him, but Malik hadn't truly understood the depths of the betrayal until now. Hayes had taken a step back, his earlier confidence shattered. The silence between him and Kane was thick, an unspoken tension that crackled in the air like static. Kane wasn't here to offer Malik any answers. Kane was here to end this. You've outlived your usefulness, Kane said with a slow, deliberate tone, his eyes fixed on Malik. His voice was cold, calculating. You think you're the hero of your own story, but you're just a pawn in ours. Malik didn't flinch. He had heard this kind of rhetoric before. The justification that the world worked in shadows, the idea that powerful people could do anything they wanted and get away with it. But he wasn't going to let that happen. You're wrong, Malik said, his voice low but firm. You've underestimated me from the start. All of you have. Kane's lips twisted into a faint smile. Underestimated you? Or did we give you just enough rope to hang yourself? Malik's mind spun, his pulse quickening, but his eyes never left Kane. He could feel the walls closing in. He had to move fast. Kane's words, though threatening, were a tell. The power wasn't in Kane's hands yet. It was still with Malik, and it was his time to fight back. I've seen what you're doing. You think you can control everything with your networks, your surveillance. But there's always a way in, Malik shot back, his words almost a challenge. You're not invincible. Kane tilted his head, as though considering Malik's words. You think this is about surveillance? About control? No, Malik. This is about securing power for those who understand how to wield it. Malik didn't back down. Then why not just kill me now? He demanded. Why drag it out? Kane's smile faded. Because you have something we need. You've cracked open Pandora's box. And if you think the truth is going to free you, you're mistaken. The truth only destroys people. Ask yourself, who are you really working for now? Is it the public, or is it you? Malik's mind flicked back to the early days of his hacking, those quiet nights spent in his room, alone, teaching himself how to manipulate the system. He had done it because he was curious, because he was desperate to prove he was more than just a troubled student. But once the truth was exposed, the data, the conspiracy, it was no longer about proving something to others. It was about survival. It had all started with a simple search for information, then became an obsession. He had dug through networks that were never meant to be accessed, uncovered files that were locked away behind firewalls, encryption, and layers of protection. What he had found, what he had exposed, was only the beginning. The more he revealed, the more he realized the extent of the power Tessa Hollis had amassed. The conspiracy went deeper than just corruption or surveillance. It was about controlling the flow of information, controlling the very fabric of society. And Malik had unknowingly cracked the code, opened the floodgates. But the cost was clear now. He wasn't just fighting against a corrupt system anymore. He was fighting against an entire network of power brokers who would stop at nothing to keep their empire intact. And Malik was in the center of it all, caught between the world he had tried to expose and the enemies who were determined to destroy him. Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flicking toward Kane. There was something more to this game, something even Hayes didn't fully understand. Malik could see the tension between them. Kane wasn't just the head of some shady operation. He was part of a far more dangerous faction, one with control over everything, governments, corporations, the media. Direct to Kane, Hayes said, his voice unsteady. This is bigger than you're letting on. We've always kept certain things contained. But Malik, Kane raised a hand, cutting him off. No, Hayes, this isn't just about containment anymore. It's about control. Malik stood up, his hands clenched into fists. Control? Is that what this is about? You're not just trying to shut me up. You're trying to erase me, to erase everything I've uncovered. You've turned this entire world into a prison. Hayes looked at Malik, his face filled with regret. I didn't have a choice, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But you're right. We all underestimated how deep this goes. Malik's mind raced. They had all been part of the same web, the same system of control. And it was clear now that they were using him, trying to bend him to their will. But Malik wasn't about to be a pawn. He had learned how to play the game, and now it was time to change the rules. You think you've won, but you haven't, Malik said, his voice steady. You're right about one thing. You can control the systems, but you'll never control the truth. Kane took a step toward him, his eyes cold and calculating. The truth, Malik, the truth is a tool, and it's one we will control. Suddenly, Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. A single text message flashed on the screen. They are coming for you. They know everything. The room froze. Hayes' face went pale. Kane's expression tightened, his fingers twitching at his side as he glanced at the phone. Malik's instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. This wasn't over. The person who had sent the message knew the truth. But the question was, who else knew? Before anyone could react, the lights in the room flickered, the sound of footsteps growing louder outside the door. The cavalry had arrived, but which side were they on? Malik felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end as the door to the room slammed shut behind him. The sirens outside had been deafening moments ago, but now, silence. The kind of silence that made you feel like the world had stopped moving. The lights flickered, casting strange, unsettling shadows across the faces of those standing around him. Hayes, Kane, and the silent agents that lined the walls like invisible sentries. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the uncertainty. The sense that, for the first time in this entire game, Malik wasn't in control. Someone else was pulling the strings, and he didn't know who it was. "Tell me what's going on, Kane," Malik demanded, his voice rising as the frustration reached its boiling point. He had been used, manipulated, and now he was standing here on the verge of something catastrophic. "Who are these people? Who's pulling your strings?" Kane didn't respond immediately. His icy demeanor remained unchanged, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Fear, Malik realized. Kane was afraid. "You're not ready for the truth," Kane finally said, his voice low, edged with something almost like regret. "You've uncovered part of the conspiracy, but there's more, far more than you realize. This isn't just about power. It's about control over everything. The data, the people, the very systems that run this world. And you, Malik, you become a threat to that." Malik's chest tightened, the air thick with the weight of those words. He had been fighting for justice, for the truth, but now he saw the full scope of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't a game of exposing corruption. It was a war for control over everything, over society itself. And Malik was caught in the crossfire. "You're wrong," Malik spat. "I'm not a threat. I'm just trying to bring the truth to light. If that threatens you, then maybe you're the one who's part of the problem." Kane took a slow step forward, his face hardening. "It's not about right or wrong, Malik. It's about survival. You've made it personal now, and you won't get out of this unscathed." Malik's mind flashed back, once again, to that fateful moment when he had cracked into the first system, the first weak point in the digital wall that protected the powerful. It had been late at night when he first found the vulnerabilities, when the world felt like it was asleep. It wasn't an accident. He had been searching, carefully picking through the layers of encryption, looking for something that would tell him where the threads of control were buried. The first breach had been small, just a crack in the system that most people would never notice. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized how vast and intricate the web was. It wasn't just about hacking into corporate systems for fun. It was about exposing a system that controlled everything, from the media to the government to the economy. What he had found was the beginning of a nightmare he couldn't have predicted. But even as he unearthed the hidden files and data streams, something started to shift. He wasn't just uncovering corruption. He was opening a Pandora's box. And whoever had built this system wasn't going to let anyone tear it apart without a fight. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Malik turned to see Agent Hayes move toward him, his face taut with something darker than before. Hayes had been one of the few people he had trusted, and now Malik wasn't sure if Hayes was part of the solution or if he was another piece of the puzzle that had been designed to trap him. "I didn't want this," Hayes said quietly, almost apologetically. "I thought you were just another hacker, someone who would stumble into the system and move on. But you didn't. You made it personal. Malik, you made yourself a target." Malik's gaze locked onto Hayes, trying to make sense of it all. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you? You've been using me. All of you have." Hayes didn't deny it. He didn't need to. Instead, he took a deep breath. "You're not the only one in danger. They'll come for you and for everyone you've worked with. This goes beyond Tessa Hollis. She's just the tip of the iceberg." At that moment, Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart skipped a beat as he fumbled to pull it out. The text on the screen was short, but it hit Malik with the force of a freight train. "They know everything. It's not over. You've made the wrong enemies." Malik's pulse quickened. His hand shook, but he steadied himself. Who could it be? How had they gotten so close? The thought of being tracked, being watched at every turn, hit him like a cold wave. The message was a warning. But from who? As if on cue, the door behind him opened, and two men walked into the room, both dressed in black suits, their faces cold, their expressions unreadable. Malik didn't recognize them, but the way Hayes looked at them told him everything he needed to know. "These are the men who run the operation," Hayes said, his voice resigned. "The ones who've been pulling the string from behind the scenes. You're not the first to expose the system, Malik, and you won't be the last. But you're the most dangerous one we've ever encountered." The two men didn't speak, but one of them stepped forward, a look of cold calculation in his eyes. He was older, with graying hair, but his presence was imposing. Director Kane is right, the man said, his voice deep and steady. What you've started cannot be undone. We've tolerated your actions because you were useful, at first. But now, it's time to deal with the consequences. Malik's blood ran cold. Consequences, he repeated, his voice steady but his mind racing. What do you want from me? Why all the secrecy? If you've got the power, why don't you just finish this? The man smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. You think it's just about you? You've stumbled onto something much bigger. What we've built is a foundation of the future. It's not just about surveillance or controlling information. It's about creating a system that can't be undone. And you've shown us the cracks. The tension in the room thickened as the two men exchanged a glance. Malik felt the weight of their gazes like a physical force pressing in on him. You're right, Malik, the man said slowly. You've shown us the cracks. But now you'll see the power that can fill them. The door slammed shut behind him, and Malik stood there, unsure whether he was walking into a trap or being pulled deeper into a game he didn't fully understand. One thing was clear now. The truth he'd uncovered had just become even more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Malik's breath caught in his throat as a heavy metal door slammed shut behind him. His heartbeat hammered against his chest, his mind racing. The air in the dark room was thick with tension, the faint sound of a dripping faucet somewhere in the distance. He hadn't meant to come here, hadn't planned on this, being trapped in a cold, underground facility, surrounded by faces he couldn't trust, in a fight he wasn't sure he could win. But here he was. In front of him stood Director Kane, his cold eyes piercing Malik's soul. Beside him, Agent Hayes seemed a shadow of the man Malik once thought he could trust. There were others in the room, too, two men in black suits, silent, ominous, watching him like hawks. Malik's mind raced. What now? Sit down, Malik, Kane said, his voice calm but dripping with an edge of authority. We need to talk. This game you started, it's bigger than you thought, and bigger than you'll ever be able to handle. Malik stood still, his legs locked. He was done being their pawn. It was time to turn the tables. I've uncovered more than you'll ever want the world to know, Malik said, his voice steady, despite the storm swirling in his chest. I didn't just break into your system to expose you. I did it to make you see you're not untouchable, and you're not going to stop me now. Kane chuckled, his fingers lightly tapping the desk in front of him. Oh, Malik, you think this is about you exposing us? That's cute. You've barely scratched the surface of what you've uncovered. You think you've exposed the truth? There's more, so much more. You've opened Pandora's box, but the real players are yet to show their hands. Malik clenched his fists, his pulse pounding. He wasn't about to back down now. Who else is involved? Tell me. Hayes shifted uneasily beside Kane, his gaze darting between Malik and the door. It was clear. Hayes was caught in the middle of something much larger than he had expected. Kane leaned forward, locking eyes with Malik. You've heard of the Collective, haven't you? The ones who have been quietly manipulating the global systems. They've been around for decades, unseen by the public eye. You're up against more than just corporate corruption. This is about global dominance, control of data, media, power. They own the world, Malik. Malik's stomach turned. He had suspected as much. The dark web he had uncovered, the manipulation, the surveillance, the deals made in shadows, all of it led back to the Collective, the hidden hand that controlled everything. And you're a part of this. Malik spat, his anger rising. You're complicit in this? You're just as bad as Tessa Hollis. Kane's lips twitched. Complicit? No, I'm a necessary part of this. He stood and walked around the desk, his footsteps echoing in the silence. You've been used, Malik. All of this, all your hacking, your idealism, it's all part of the game. And the people you've been trying to expose? They control the narrative, the data, the information. They control everything. Not anymore, Malik retorted, his voice gaining strength. Not if I have anything to say about it. Kane stopped in his tracks, his cold eyes narrowing. You think you can fight this alone? You have no idea what you're up against. The world you see is only a fraction of what's really going on. You're out of your depth, and this is the moment where you realize that. Malik's mind flashed back to a pivotal moment, the night he first cracked the encryption. The thrill of breaking into a system that was locked tight, the excitement that rushed through him when the first file opened, revealing information that no one was supposed to see. It was supposed to be a simple mission, just a peek into the corporate world, a minor exposure of secrets that no one would notice. But then he found the first mention of the collective, a shadowy group operating behind the scenes. He had assumed they were just another conspiracy theory. But the more he dug, the more real they became. These weren't just the usual corrupt executives. They were a network of power that controlled everything. Governments, media, even technology companies. They were all puppets dancing to the whims of the collective. The deeper Malik dug, the more the world he had thought he understood began to collapse around him. The truth wasn't just out there. It was a weapon, one that could change everything. And once the truth was out, there was no going back. The very system he'd been fighting to expose wasn't just corrupt. It was a machine built to last forever. As the weight of Kane's words settled in, Malik realized something even more chilling. He was part of the conspiracy now. I wasn't just a hacker to you, was I? Malik said, his voice hollow with realization. I was a tool, a means to an end. Kane didn't respond at first, but his silence spoke volumes. You've been played, Malik, Kane said finally, his voice cold with finality. And you're not the only one. Tessa Hollis, you think she's a mastermind? No, she's one of the pawns. The collective controls her, too. Everyone you've trusted is either with us or they're against you. Malik's mind reeled. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he reached for it, his hands shaking. The message was simple, but it sent a jolt of panic through him. They know where you are. They're coming for you. Trust no one. The words hit Malik like a ton of bricks. His heart raced. He wasn't safe. Not from Kane, not from Tessa, and now not even from the people who had been pretending to help him. The air in the room grew heavy, the walls closing in. Malik was alone. Before he could react, the door behind him creaked open. The familiar sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A shadow crossed the doorway. Malik's breath caught in his throat as a voice, one he never thought he would hear again, spoke from behind him. Malik, it's time. Malik spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief. The figure standing in the doorway wasn't an enemy. It was someone he thought he had left behind. It was Leo. Malik's breath caught in his throat as the door creaked open behind him. The familiar figure standing there, framed in the doorway, made his heart race. His mind tried to catch up with the shock, but the truth was already sinking in, each beat of his heart a painful reminder of how much had changed. Leo. Malik breathed, disbelief and confusion written across his face. Leo's dark eyes met his, a knowing look in them that Malik couldn't fully decipher. The years of friendship, the late-night discussions, the trust that Malik had placed in him, it was all unraveling in an instant. He had trusted Leo with everything. And now, in the face of the cold conspiracy Malik had uncovered, he wasn't sure where Leo stood. Malik, listen to me, Leo said, his voice low, almost pleading. You've got to get out of here. Now. They know you're still alive, and they're coming for you. They know you're the one who's been exposing them. Malik's mind raced. His thoughts flickered between disbelief and the gut-wrenching reality of his situation. Leo was supposed to be his ally. Wasn't he? Wasn't Leo the one who had helped him when everything seemed hopeless? But now, Malik took a step forward, narrowing his eyes. Leo, what the hell is going on? Who are they? What do you know? Leo flinched, as if Malik's words had cut deeper than he'd intended. He glanced at the agent standing behind Malik, Hayes, who had seemed so uncertain, and the other two men who had barely spoken since they'd walked in. Leo seemed to weigh his options, his fingers twitching at his sides like he was ready to bolt. I can't tell you everything right now, Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I've been trying to protect you. From the beginning. I'm not who you think I am, Malik. The people you're up against, they are too powerful. They control everything. They've been watching you from the moment you cracked their systems, and they'll stop at nothing to keep you quiet. Malik's head was spinning. Leo had known all along? Had he been involved with these people? Was Leo part of the collective? Are you working for them? Malik demanded, his voice shaking with betrayal. Leo hesitated, and for a split second, Malik saw something flicker in his eyes, a deep regret, a hint of guilt. Leo shook his head quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush. No, I didn't want you to find out like this. I've been trying to protect you, Malik. I've been trying to keep you safe. You're not ready for this. The truth, the whole truth, it's worse than you think. Malik's mind flashed to the encrypted files he had cracked. The dark web of manipulation, corruption, and power. He had already seen the depth of the collective's influence. He knew they weren't just pulling strings. They were controlling the world. I've been fighting for the truth, Leo, Malik said, his voice thick with frustration. All I wanted was to expose what they were doing, to bring this system down. But now I can't tell what's real anymore. What's the truth, Leo? The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating. Malik's mind raced as he tried to piece together everything he had learned. Leo was the key. But was Leo part of the system, or was he trying to stop it? And if Leo was telling the truth, then who was Malik fighting for, and who was he fighting against? I'm trying to stop them, Leo said, his voice barely audible. They want you dead, and the only way to survive is to trust me. I have a plan, Malik, a way to bring them down. But we have to act fast. They're already moving against us. Malik's mind flashed back to a conversation he had overheard long ago. It had been one of the first signs that something wasn't right. He had been sitting in a coffee shop with Leo, and the two of them were casually discussing Malik's growing frustration with the systems of control he had been uncovering. At the time, Malik had been working alone, naive to the true scale of what he had stumbled upon. I mean, don't you ever wonder, Malik? Leo had said, his voice a little too casual. What if the system's not as broken as we think? What if it's all part of the plan? At the time, Malik hadn't thought much of it. He'd brushed it off as Leo being his usual cynic. But now, those words haunted him. What if Leo had known more than he was letting on? What if Leo had been working within the system all along, manipulating Malik for his own reasons? The thought made Malik's blood run cold. I can't do this anymore, Leo, Malik said, his voice hardening with resolve. You've dragged me into a war I didn't choose, and now you're telling me I have to trust you. Leo's eyes flickered with something close to panic. You have no choice. They've already made their move. We need to get out of here. They are coming for us right now. Malik's head spun. He had been a pawn in a much larger game, and now, standing on the edge of it, he realized he could either keep running or finally face the truth he had been uncovering. You're wrong, Malik said, his voice steady. I'm not running anymore. I'm finishing this. I'm going to expose them, everything. I'm going to bring down the collective. Leo's expression faltered, as though the very idea of confronting the system head-on terrified him. Malik, you can't. You don't understand how powerful they are. They'll kill you, kill everyone you care about, and erase every trace of what you've done. Malik stepped back, feeling a strange calm wash over him. It wasn't just anger driving him anymore. It was clarity. He was no longer the scared kid hiding in the back of a classroom, unseen and unnoticed. He was Malik Rivera, the one who had uncovered the cracks in the system. I don't have a choice anymore, Malik said, his voice hard. I'm going to bring them down. I'm going to make sure the world knows who they really are. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open again, and this time, it wasn't one of Kane's men. The figure that entered was familiar, but unexpected. It was Mrs. Langdon. Her expression was unreadable as she stepped into the room, the weight of her presence making the already tense atmosphere even more suffocating. She looked at Malik with an intensity that made his blood run cold. I'm sorry, Malik, she said, her voice cold and clinical, but you've made a mistake. You have no idea who you're really up against. The silence in the room was suffocating. Malik stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as Mrs. Langdon stepped forward, the weight of her presence filling the small, dimly lit room. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were fixed on him with an intensity he hadn't expected. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped moving. Everything he had fought for, every secret he had uncovered, seemed to collapse around him in the face of this new revelation. Malik, Mrs. Langdon said, her voice smooth and controlled, you've been a thorn in their side for too long now. But you didn't really think you could change anything, did you? Malik's stomach twisted. His mind raced with questions. Why was she here? Why was she a part of this? His earlier suspicion that he had been followed, watched from the very beginning, now felt painfully real. "You've always thought of yourself as a hero in your own story," she continued, taking a step closer. "But the truth is, you're nothing more than a pawn in a game far bigger than you could ever understand." Malik's voice was a low growl, filled with disbelief. "You're part of this? After everything I've uncovered, you're still playing their game?" Mrs. Langdon's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I was never playing their game. Malik, I am the game." The words hit Malik like a punch. Mrs. Langdon wasn't just another part of the system he had uncovered. She was the orchestrator. She was the one who had been pulling strings, manipulating him from the very beginning. Every step he had taken, every decision he had made, it had all been part of a plan. Malik's mind flashed back to the first time he had met Mrs. Langdon, that cold, dismissive teacher who had judged him for not living up to his potential. At the time, he had seen her as just another symbol of an indifferent system, one that wrote off kids like him without a second thought. But now, looking back, he realized how carefully she had watched him, how she had seen him as an opportunity, not to help him, but to mold him. She knew he was intelligent, knew he could see through the cracks. And she had used that. It all made sense now. The file he had cracked, the data he had leaked, the truth he had exposed, it had all been part of a bigger plan. Mrs. Langdon had played him like a fiddle, feeding him just enough information to get him to move, to expose a conspiracy without realizing the full extent of the forces behind it. "You think you won." Mrs. Langdon's voice was cold, calculating. "You've merely been following a path we set for you. We knew the moment you hacked into our system that you would expose the truth, but you exposed the wrong parts." Malik's heart sank. The weight of her words struck him like a ton of bricks. Everything he had done, all the lives he had risked, the people he had tried to protect, it had all been part of a game he hadn't even known he was playing. "Why?" Malik demanded, his voice tight with anger. "Why drag me into this? Why me?" Mrs. Langdon stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Because you were the perfect candidate. You were always underestimated. No one saw you coming. You were the perfect tool to do what had to be done." Malik shook his head in disbelief. "I was never your tool, Langdon. I was doing what's right. I was trying to bring down a corrupt system." She laughed softly, a bitter sound. "The system was never broken, Malik. It's always worked the way it was designed. What you've done is not bring it down. You've merely shaken the foundation." Malik's mind raced. He had always thought he was fighting for something noble. But now, standing in front of Mrs. Langdon, he realized how deep the manipulation had gone, how much of the story had been crafted to guide him exactly where they wanted him. But he wasn't going to let it end like this. "I don't care what you think you've built," Malik said, his voice shaking with raw emotion. "I've seen the truth now, and I'm not backing down." Mrs. Langdon's eyes flashed with something dark, something dangerous. "You think you can expose us now? You think you're the hero? The truth you found won't set you free, Malik. It will consume you." For a moment, the room fell silent. Malik could feel the weight of her words, but deep down, he knew what he had to do. He had started this journey to expose the system, to tear down the walls that kept people like him in the dark, and he wasn't going to stop now. "You've already lost, Langdon," Malik said, a new sense of resolve washing over him. "I'm going to make sure the world knows the truth. I'm going to make sure the world knows you." With that, Malik turned and walked toward the door, his steps firm. But just as he reached for the handle, the door burst open. Standing in the doorway was Leo, the last person Malik ever expected to see again. His face was pale, his expression filled with regret. But his eyes, those eyes, were filled with something deeper. Something that made Malik's blood run cold. "Malik," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's not over. You don't know who's really in charge. It's too late." Malik froze, his hand still on the door. The word rang in his ears, a warning he couldn't ignore. Who had Leo been working for? And what had he been hiding from Malik? Leo took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower. "You think you figured it all out, but you haven't. You're still playing into their hands." The world felt like it was closing in on Malik. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stood in the small, dimly lit room, the door still open behind him. Leo's words echoed in his mind, a haunting warning that chilled him to the bone. You're still playing into their hands. Malik's hand clenched around the doorknob, his mind racing as everything he thought he understood began to unravel. Leo, the one person he had trusted, was still hiding something. Something so crucial it made Malik question everything. Leo, what the hell is going on? Malik demanded, his voice a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Leo's expression faltered, the mask of calm slipping for just a moment. Malik, you don't understand. They've been watching us both. Mrs. Langdon, Kane, they're all part of a larger game. He paused, his voice growing quiet. It's bigger than the collective. Malik's pulse quickened. Bigger than the collective? What do you mean? Malik asked, his stomach sinking. Who's pulling the strings now? Leo hesitated, glancing nervously at the door before taking a step closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. There's someone even above them. Someone you don't know about. And you're standing right in the middle of it. The collective isn't just a group. It's a front. They were set up to fail. Malik, they were never the ones in charge. Malik's thoughts whirled. Everything he had believed in, the systems he had tried to expose, the enemies he had made, it was all a lie, a larger conspiracy. Before he could process Leo's words, another voice cut through the tension. You figured it out, haven't you, Malik? Malik froze. He turned slowly to face Mrs. Langdon, who had entered the room unnoticed. Her expression was cold, calculating, but there was something new in her eyes, something almost apologetic. I didn't want to be the one to tell you, she continued, her voice softer now, almost like she was trying to console him. But you're right. You've been manipulated from the start. You're smarter than I gave you credit for. But it's too late now. What the hell are you talking about? Malik spat, his anger rising again. I thought you were just another part of the system, but now you're telling me it's all a lie? You've known all along. You've been playing me this whole time. Langdon didn't deny it. We all have our roles to play. Malik, you weren't supposed to find out. We wanted to use you, just like the others. But you're not the first person we brought into this game. And you won't be the last. Malik's mind was racing. Why me? Then, why use me? Langdon gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Because you were the perfect candidate. You were the one who could see past the surface. The one who would crack the code, who would expose us. And when you did, we knew we could turn the truth into a weapon. You thought you were fighting for something bigger. But you were just a tool. The weight of her words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. A tool. That's all he was. His fists clenched. You've been using me all along. For what? To create chaos. To create control, Langdon replied, her eyes narrowing. When the world falls apart, when the truth is exposed, the people who control it will step in. The real power is what comes after the collapse. And you were always meant to be the spark. Everything clicked. The manipulation, the lies, the games. Malik had been set up from the beginning, but now he saw the true depth of it. They hadn't been afraid of him uncovering the truth. They had been waiting for him to uncover it, to expose the cracks, so they could step in and control the fallout. I've been a pawn the whole time, Malik said, his voice cold now. You wanted me to expose everything, to light the fire, and now you're going to use that to rebuild. Langdon nodded, her expression unflinching. Exactly. The system was never broken. Malik, it was always designed to be this way. The collective, they were just a front. You've been playing right into their hands. But Leo stepped forward now, his face desperate. Malik, it's not too late. We can still fight back. We can still expose them for good. Malik felt the weight of the decision crashing down on him. He could expose the truth and bring the world down around him, or he could walk away. He had already lost so much. What more could he sacrifice? For a moment, it felt like the entire world hung in balance. Was it worth it? Then, Malik turned to face Langdon and Leo, his expression hardening with resolve. I've already lost everything, he said quietly. But I'll be damned if I'm going to let you turn the truth into a weapon to control the world. The people deserve to know what you've done, and I'm going to make sure they do. As Malik reached for his phone to send the final leak, the weight of the choice settled on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about exposing the system that had enslaved people like him for years. About giving the world a chance to fight back. But just as his fingers hovered over the screen, his phone rang. It was an anonymous number. Malik hesitated, then answered. "Malik," a voice crackled on the other end. "You don't know who you're dealing with. They've already made their move. They've silenced everyone. You can't win this war." The voice cut off before Malik could respond. The room seemed to close in on Malik as the phone went dead in his hand. For the first time in the entire fight, he wasn't sure if exposing the truth would save him or destroy him. He glanced at Leo and Langdon, knowing now that his final battle had just begun. But as he turned to leave the room, a shiver ran down his spine. The walls weren't just closing in. They were moving, shifting, changing. Something far darker was coming, and he had no idea who would be the last man standing.